Hey, Stern listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, Jorge and Anfisa. Let's continue to watch and see what happens.
But I'm not trying to talk bad about you. It's just like I'm trying to get you to realize how I feel inside.
Yeah, I mean, they're not in a terrible zone. They've been in worse zones before, but if I were there, I would say, good, Jorge, Anfisa, your wife, is very vulnerable. It sounds like she's really... So how would I... Because the thing is with the Anfisas of the world that I've worked with, you have to be real careful about moving too fast for a variety of reasons. But I guess let's just say I had a good enough relationship with both of them. I'd say, okay, Anfisa, like, so when he was complaining, how did that make you feel? And she'd be like, well, pisses me off. Well, okay, it made you angry. What other feeling did you have? Well, it just makes me feel like he doesn't love me. Okay, so when you feel that way, do you feel like he's going to leave you? He's going to abandon you? What's going on? And, hopefully we'd get to a place in all likelihood where she would say, well, it hurts my feelings and I feel like I'm just going to be alone and no one will ever love me and that kind of thing. Okay, so when he was bringing up some complaints about you, you fell into, well, I wouldn't say that because that could trigger them. You felt very, very hurt. You felt like he might leave you and you'd be alone and that would be terrible. And so you were hurting. And now, from my perspective, people should be allowed to complain about their partner, particularly in therapy, without having to worry about the other person falling apart. But that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is, the crux of the matter is Anfisa's reactivity and her relational traumas. And there's no sense in talking about the complaints if all she can feel is pain. It's just, there's no growth that can happen. So, I'd get her to be explicit about that pain. And then I would say to Jorge, so when you hear that, so I might actually say to Jorge something like, so Jorge, as you were bringing up things that you would like to be different, so, I'm kind of wording it differently. As you were bringing up things that you'd like to be different, and you also talked about how you sometimes question the relationship, both of you actually kind of saying that, but as you were saying that, Jorge, so you notice in the way that I'm wording it to the Jorge character, I'm wording it in a way that both validates what Jorge was saying, and I'm not wording it in a way that's saying for Jorge that he's a jerk face. I'm wording it in a way that it sounds reasonable what Jorge was doing, but I'm also keeping my eye on making sure I don't trigger Anfisa, because if I said something like if I was really gonna, and this is the art of couple therapy, it's you can't teach this, you have to learn it through experience. I would if I really just wanted to validate Jorge and Anfisa, and I didn't care about Anfisa or Anfisa wasn't in the room, I'd say so you were just bringing up some pretty minor issues that were totally understandable. She says she would leave you if you didn't have money. She's hit you, she keyed your car. So I understand why you're bringing those things up. So that would be me validating Jorge, but that would be too much, okay? And I would suspect that Jorge would know that, and thus the more tempered down validation that I would have of him, the way I, role played the first time, I would suspect that he would know, thank you for not going full validation because we both don't want to trigger my wife. So he would appreciate that and also feel validated. It's like, okay, he's framing it in a way that sounds innocuous. It's like, okay, so Jorge, earlier you bring up some concerns you had, things you'd like to be different, which is fine. And you were also saying you were questioning the relationship, which is also fine, but we could understand that for Anfisa, your wife, this, and apparently it was very triggering for her. It was very scary, very hurtful for her to hear. It's okay for you to have those thoughts, but we could see how that could really hurt your wife. And she's in a lot of pain right now. So just stepping out of the role play, you see how it's an art form to validate both people when they're in conflict. You have to be very good at wording things that are true and spontaneous and that resonate with them, but also it doesn't stomp on someone and accidentally trigger. Because if I accidentally trigger someone, then we're on a whole other topic and they might blow out of therapy, and what kind of good have I done in that situation? So I'd word it that way. And I remember realizing this early in my career. I think it might have even been one of the things I wrote on I had all these Post-it notes that I would keep at my desk in my therapy office, and after a session I'd be like, oh, and I'd write this word down and I'd put it on my poster board, my cork board, and half the time when I saw the Post-it note the next day, I'd be like, what was it saying? Sort of like, when you're stoned or something and you write something down, like, time is a circle, and you think it's brilliant, and then you see it the next day, you're just like, huh? Anyway, so when I would have those experiences, but I think one of the times I wrote down was that therapy is diplomacy. Now, there's various different definitions of diplomacy, but diplomacy in this sense is the ability to empathize, the ability to know how your actions and words impact the other person, but you're also trying to lead someone. Diplomacy involves trying to get somewhere. You're not just trying to communicate something. You're actually trying to get somewhere. You're trying to establish peace or trade, or between diplomacy between nations, but also diplomacy between people. You're not just validating. You're validating with a purpose. There's a reason why you're doing all this stuff, and so I'm trying to help them in a certain way, but I have to be active and involved. Anyway, point is that was, I think, one of the words. So then I would hope that I would get the George character to turn to the Anfisa character and empathize and say, I could see how that would hurt you, and just have that be that, right? Because I validated the George, so he knows that at least I think it's okay. I might even ask Anfisa, well, in this state, it would be too much to ask Anfisa to say, is it okay that George actually does have some concerns? Maybe that's for a later time. But so then George could actually say, I see how that would hurt your feelings. And he doesn't even necessarily have to apologize. Maybe he would, but at least just being there, because that's, I think, really what she needs right now, is just someone to say, I love you, I'm with you, I understand you, I care about you. Let's see what happens.
Because it seems like when you do these crazy things, like, you seem like you don't care about anything else.
So, I don't think he's helping. He's not being a jerk, but it's his way of just like, stop it, and that's a very common thing you'll get from the Georges in a relationship like this. It's just like, well, if you just stopped being crazy, everything would be fine, and that's essentially what he's saying right now. And it's not going to help in this situation. What she wants right now is, does anyone love me?
Like, I'm not trying to sit here and shame you as a person.
Yes, that's what you're trying.
No,
You understand that we have cameras around.
No, but I'm not trying to say that you're a bad person. I'm just trying to get you to understand.
So I think he intuits, which is good, that he intuits, okay, I'm not saying that you're a bad person. I'm not trying to shame you for being a bad person. And then she admits, but that's how it feels. This is a great conversation, very high level, very differentiated in this moment. And he's like, he's heading in the right direction, but if he just had a little help of like what I was saying earlier, this conversation could go so much better. And I can't tell you how many sessions I've had that have looked just like this. I'm at work right now. This is exactly what a session will look like, except I'm in there a little bit more, just nudging, bringing stuff out that they're not used to talking about. Because I'm going to take a guess and say that for George, he grew up in a family where vulnerability wasn't the norm. It's in him. It's not that me nudging is forcing or introducing an idea. The idea is in him, but it just doesn't know how to emerge, or they don't know to pay attention to that's happening for them. So it would just be that, just sort of highlighting something already inside of him and saying, focus on that. And a lot of couple therapy actually involves that when I think about it. Like, a lot of couple therapy involves me finding things that are inside of people already and saying, okay, your normal pattern is to do this, is to explain or lecture or avoid or criticize or something. And I get that, but there's another thing inside of you, which is this. And a big part of therapy with couples is identifying that other part and highlighting it and saying, that should be the first thing. And a lot of times what I'll say is, first, do the vulnerable emotion thing, where he says something like, when I see you crying, it hurts me. I don't want to see you crying. It's okay you're crying, and what I was talking about earlier, it's just that, like, when you wiped my phone in my computer, or when you hit me, it really hurts me. It hurts my feelings, and because I love you, okay, that kind of thing. And just leave it at that. But what people resort to, because they don't think that's going to work, is they will say, well, you need to stop being crazy. And so if you're the recipient of that, and every couple suffers from this, by the way, that what's really happening for us is based on fear or pain, anxiety, hurt, frustration, anger, and criticism and intellectualization results is based on that. We feel the feelings, we might not even be aware of it, we transform it into something else. Often what a lot of people will transform it into is, well, if I just tell them how to behave, then everything will be different, which is his mode. It's just like, well, you just not be crazy. You need to just not do that. Instead of what I think will really actually get her to change is to say, when you hit me, it hurt my feelings because I love you and I want to open myself up to you. But when you do that, it makes me want to close off because I don't know when you're going to do that again. Or it makes me feel like you don't care about my feelings. I think you do care about my feelings, but it makes me feel like you don't because that was really hurtful. And if instead of saying you're crazy, stop being crazy, and you just say, this is how it affected me without being accusatory and without being, vindictive, then it engages the empathy in Anfisa. And Anfisa would be like, oh, well, I could see that. I didn't want to hurt you. I could see how that would hurt you. And then she will come up with her own solution. I can't tell you how many times I'm telling couples this. It's like, don't come up with a solution for your partner. One, you're probably coming up with 1 out of 10,000 possible solutions, and it's not likely to coincide with your partner's best solution for themselves. 2, you're giving a message that your partner's an idiot and can't come up with their own solutions, which isn't good. So it's demeaning to tell your partner, like, I think you should be doing this. And what I'll say is lead with the pain and the fear, and your partner will just naturally come up with a solution because they're interested in pleasing you. Anfisa is interested in making George happy. And so if George just says, this makes me happy and this made me sad, then she will figure it out herself. But if you just tell her what to do, then she's like, you're just telling me what to do. She doesn't have the motivation. She doesn't know why. She's just like, well, because the way George comes across, I could see her concluding he doesn't really have emotions. He doesn't really care. This is a really fantastic, let's rewind this. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Let's talk about being a problem solver. Whenever we have a problem in our lives, we go through different stages of change. In the pre-contemplative stage, we're not even ready to acknowledge the problem. When we finally manage to recognize the issue, we enter the contemplative stage. In this stage, we know we have a problem, but we're not ready to take action. We're contemplating what action to take and whether or not to take action at all. For some people, they can remain in the contemplative stage for years, never taking action to improve their life. I'm guessing that some of you are in this stage regarding going to therapy. You've acknowledged that you probably need therapy, but for whatever reason, you haven't taken action yet. Well, as I always say, we all need therapy from time to time, and we all deserve therapy. One way to easily get therapy is through BetterHelp. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and/or even live chat sessions with your therapist. So, when you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/Kirk.
Yes, that's what you're trying.
No,
You understand
no.
that we have cameras around.
No, but I'm not trying to say that you're a bad person. I'm just trying to get you to understand when you
Well,
do,
then can
when
you
you
tell
pee.
me? Can you tell me that in private?
Well, so there's a lot of things here, and I'm guessing when people saw this, it was an indictment on George, and you could argue that to some extent, but I think for George, he doesn't know what to say when the cameras aren't around, and I would see this a lot, that the Georges of the world, couple therapy, they come in, the Georges of the world would catalog everything and then finally let it out in session, because the Georges of the world feel like, well, there's a therapist here to help me, and my partner can't escalate and abuse me or escalate and do something else. Like, my partner has to sit here for an hour, and I think that might be a part of it. I think another part of it is that because I don't think he's interested in humiliating her. If anything, he's not interested in humiliating. Well, maybe there's a part of him as time goes on that wants to show the world, like, look how terrible she is. So there's probably some of that. But I think especially earlier on, there were so many opportunities, I think, for him to say, you wouldn't believe what she did last night. And he was, I think, fairly careful about that. Anyway, but it's a total legit thing of just like, how come I'm being ganged up on? How come I'm being attacked here? How come this, why are you doing this to me in front of the cameras? Why did we have to meet up with your sister in front of the cameras? It's another piece of evidence that I don't think Anfisa is that interested in the show. I think she's way more interested in her relationship with George. I think that's her primary thing. So she's asking him, why do you have to do it on camera? Now, he could still say, oh, well, I'm sorry. I don't know, it just came up. I love you, and I just wish that things were less conflictual. There's a way he could respond right now, even though it's true that she has a legit gripe. But really, everyone on this show could say that about their partners. It's like, how come you're doing this now? And it just makes you wonder how many couples agree, like, look, we'll have a little bit of drama for the cameras, but, if anything serious comes up, not on camera. Tell me in person.
Why are you trying to?
She has a good point.
But let me ask you, Anfisa, do you really love George?
Yes.
I mean, Sean is awesome. I hear some people in the comments will criticize Sean sometimes, and this reminds me of how good she is. And you have to know that the producers are in her ear. They edit everything. They engineer everything. Like back in the day when the show was less popular or it was less Jerry Springerified, it's clear that they just let Sean do her thing. You don't get the sense that the team of producers and marketers are trying to create drama, because the drama is there. And I keep thinking that too, even with the more contemporary tell-alls. It's like, you don't have to create drama. There's drama there. If you just let Sean have some concentrated time, she has a good instinct for like what to do. And that question is just so great. It's kind of off topic, but it's close enough. And I think Sean knows, like, this is the time to ask this question. This is the time where she might actually answer it in an honest way. And so, do you actually love him? She says it in a very open-ended way, in a very kind way. And then Anfisa says yes. And I get chills because she does this. She does love him, and he does love her. They have a very conflictual relationship. Lots of problems, but underneath it all is a desperation and a love. And so she says, yes, I do love him.
Do you feel bad when, you key his car? Or
I don't like this question though. I mean, it's a good question. Not as a therapist, I guess she's a journalist, right? So as a journalist, this is a good question, because you're trying to corner someone a little bit. It's like, okay, well, you love him, so are you sure you don't feel bad? Because you're trying to get that soundbite of, yes, I feel bad, because Sean probably knows that the audience wants Anfisa to admit to that or something. Anyway, so let's see. If I was taking a guess, I think in the state that she's in, she's probably not going to go to the fake bravado mode, I think, but it's too vulnerable to say that she feels bad. And I don't know if she actually does feel bad, because the distorted viewpoint that she probably possesses probably doesn't allow her to see it for the way that it is. But meaning that her pain, as she was keying the car, she was in so much pain, it felt actually congruent. It felt fair to her. And a lot of people with these traumas, when they do those kinds of behaviors, that's the case. It feels fair. It's like, well, but he did this, he did that. And from the outside, you're like, well, you understand those are, yeah, that wasn't great, but you times it times 100. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But to them, small transgressions feel times 100. But anyway, so if I was taking a guess, I would think she would avoid, or he will intervene and save her. Let's see what happens.
or when you erase his phone? Do you?
Like I said, I do it for a reason. Like he does something bad and I do.
Right. So that's her essentially answering it, but avoiding. It's exactly in line with what I was saying, is that it's not a matter of feeling bad or guilty or remorse. It's a matter of, I have my reasons. He did this thing and I felt completely terrified and hurt and just falling into a deep abyss of emptiness and terribleness. And that's just how I express myself. That's how I tell him not to do that again. And so I'm guessing from the outside it might look weird, but to me it totally makes sense. I'm guessing that's what she's saying.
Well, do you think that the relationship can survive going the way it's going now?
I think a lot of changes need to be made.
Anfisa, if George...
So Sean asks a good question. Do you think this relationship will survive given the way things are going? And she avoids the question. And then he saves her, steps in and says, if some things will change. I think for her, she talks about leaving him, but often the Anfisas of the world, when they're really upset, it will occur to them. It's just like, maybe I should leave you. But baseline, there's just no way that's going to happen because the desperation for closeness is too great. In fact, a lot of Anfisas of the world will tolerate an abusive partner because of that reason. So, because they would rather have a shred of attachment security and companionship, even if it was ultimately destructive, than to be alone.
Give you more attention, the attention that you want. If he's willing to make certain sacrifices to make you happier, what sacrifices would you be willing to make George happier?
Another fantastic question. I mean, it really puts Anfisa on the spot, because if she answers with her bravado, which is what she typically will do to the cameras, Anfisa knows that doesn't make any sense. It'd be such a terrible way of answering the question. So, the obvious answer is for Anfisa to say, well, I have anger issues, I need to stop. And Anfisa is capable of that. So maybe she'll say something like that. Or he'll save her. Fascinating tell-all. Let's see what happens.
I think I made enough sacrifices by leaving everything in Russia and moving here.
Okay. So she's responding by saying, I've already made sacrifices. And I think it's true. She has. And let's see if Sean follows it up and says, okay, that's great, but are there other kind of relational sacrifices or changes that, because if things are going to get better, you're both going to have to make changes. And that is a therapist-y thing to say. It's not really a go-to but there are times when I will ask that question of just like, okay, if you're really interested in making this work, then you both have to, and sometimes I'll even have this question mainly as an intervention, not necessarily to get at solutions, but to really introduce the idea that if they're really interested in making things better, they need to stop focusing on the other person and complaining and start thinking about what they can do themselves, because you can only control your own behavior. And if both people focus on that at least some of the time, then things are much more likely to get better. Because, a lot of couples just like, well, if you change, and the other person, no, you need to change. No, you need to change. And I'm like, well, you both need to change. And so we need to shift from this trying to win the argument to sitting with what you understand the other person is saying and really living in that space. And so just asking that question sometimes will provoke that mindset, right? But anyway, so let's see if Sean asks a second question. It's just like, well, that's great, but are there other things that you might be able to do? I think Anfisa, it's too much for her, but I'd be curious to see how she would react.
Do you realize the type of sacrifice that Anfisa has made to come here to be with you?
No, he's one of the Americans. They think that everybody just wants to come to America and they should be happy just because they are in America.
Yeah, I think she is right about that, at least the way that he talks. And it is a common racist or ignorant American thing to think that it's like people in other countries They don't care about their families. They don't care about their community. They don't care about their culture. They don't care about their language. They don't care about their traditions. They don't care about the food. They don't care about all those things. And they would much rather be in America and give it all up because everyone knows that all other countries suck compared to the United States. And it's just like, huh? And that is not something that people are born with. You know, we're not born with that idea. They're told that idea by a bunch of nationalists and ridiculousness, and Rambo movies and Chuck Norris movies. But I am curious as to what he'll say, because I think he has enough intuition to know that he should probably say thank you for sacrificing. Or he'll be really stuck on this idea of like, look, fine, yeah, you sacrifice a lot, but it'd be nicer if you sacrificed this notion that you're always right, that if you just stopped reacting. So let's see what happens.
Anfisa, what was the most emotional thing about the day that you got married?
I think that's a tough question for her to answer, because I think she's probably feeling a lot of feelings right now. Like, I felt good that day because I was actually getting attention and I felt secure. And I don't feel that way so much anymore, particularly now. I think she might also feel worried about being vulnerable. She's probably wanting to scale back on vulnerability. So she's just avoiding that question.
George, what was it for you like?
It was great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I were there, I'd be like, it was great. Okay, how was it great? Let's go, you know? It's good that he said something positive. At least he said something other than her. I mean, she didn't say anything. And he's, I think, worried about vulnerability as well. And I think his default mode is to be, you know, closed and not to be vulnerable in that way.
Before, like, to go through the whole process, I wanted, like, I'm still planning to give Anfisa a big wedding. You
Are
know,
you? What do you think is making her most emotional right now, George?
I think what made her emotional was seeing the moment again.
Mm-hmm.
There's another really good question by Sean. I will ask that kind of question often in this circumstance. You know, if I asked the Anfisa in the room, how you feel, and she didn't respond, I would turn to him and say, what do you think she's feeling? Because it's like, well, what else do you do? I mean, certainly we could just sit in silence, but sometimes that can be rough. And then at the very least, it's an opportunity for him to empathize. And then he says, well, I think she's just thinking about what happened. I would, as a therapist, and Sean isn't, and that's not the purpose of this, but if I were there, I'd try to elicit more of just like, well, okay, so that's part of it. But what do you think emotionally she's going through? You know, that kind of thing. Because I think if Anfisa were seen in that way, she'd feel more secure, and it would be a good idea for them to engage in that habitually. And if I can introduce that and highlight it and encourage them to be more habitual about that, things would improve in every relationship.
What did you think his answer was? But yay, we got a winner here. Okay. George?
Her everything.
Everything. Oh, very sweet. Very sweet. Anfisa, what did you say he was going to say? Go ahead, show that.
Okay, they're having a light moment, so they asked, what do you think your man likes about you the most, or something? And so he said, her everything.
Selfless.
Selfless. Okay, great. Matt, how did you describe Allah? And
Allah is awesome.
Allah, what was your answer?
Spelling is
Sensitive. Anfisa, describe George in one word. Funny.
Funny.
That's good. Anfisa, amazing.
Okay, interesting. So she thinks of him as funny, which is, I think, a peek behind the curtain in terms of their relationship. And then he says, amazing. If I were her, I'd be like, okay, do you have a specific thing there? Or what? Because that's kind of in tune, or it's in line with what we've seen from him often, which is, it's not a lot of depth there.
I'm not saying like they're gonna be in our relationship, but I'm saying like they're gonna be a part of my life, regardless of anything. Like if I went to Russia, like I would communicate with your family members.
Yeah, because they like you, because I don't tell them bad things about you. We're gonna start this again.
So obviously there's still a lot of work to be done.
All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.